Good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you for coming out and for supporting us. We really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. I'm going to keep my comments brief, but I hope to speak to you guys a little later. Thank you so much.
And thank you. I'm just so happy that we could house this at NYU Tannen in Brooklyn. For those of you that don't know, Basquiat was actually born and raised here. So this is a very symbolic space. I hope that you enjoy our presentation. And once again, thank you for joining us this morning. Now you'll hear a poetry reading from Shavette Bishop.
Good morning. Technology, let me pull this screen up. All right, my name is Shavette Bishop, and I'll be doing two pieces inspired by Basquiat. Study of now. Right now. It happened then. Where were you looking? We waited till you showed us what now was. You laugh. What now is bebop. Dip your brush in music, painted the town. Bebop breadcrumbs back in time, said, find your way back. Follow the crowns. The world you put souls back in as is, covering things they never asked for. Worked best by horn, something like a conch signal. Maroon spirit freed, gathered every piece of now extra large medium. You outgrew us. Died your way into a club, even your idols missed. What's it like choosing your next voice? Dip your brush in dark matter, spraying same old verses across walls artists tend to hit. Not dead, not in praise of poison. We all pick one for the love of now. Thank you. Gifts, body, and time. A mother grows body, mind, love, character. Man made things like cars break bodies instantly. His mother says, here's the blueprint, the rules. Next time they're broken, let them be your terms. Boy never allows name to be broken. Jean-Michel Basquiat, say this right. Samo, say this right. Anatomy of the earth. Man knows he won't be here long. Races time for his life, leaving us in a cloud of art. He classifies it Creole. All of history needing to survive at once, the need to know your history to survive. Father Island, Haiti, Mother Island, Puerto Rico, he knows what happens, how they will praise him as long as he produces, while they can mine his resources. This is the first time they could fit 2 islands on a plane, wrapped in a city so convenient. They say, look how happy he is, how he dances, sings, must be his paradise. They always think a once broken singing black body dancing is in paradise. No, it is in praise. Mourning is praise too. We've been praising since time was nameless. Why stop now? Don't you know these motions are contagious? Call it hip hop. Call it born over and over. Call it resurrection, new life. Do you remember the blueprint? Praise if yes. Thank you.
Hello? Good morning. Good morning. All right. Cosmic concept Basquiat. The world of Basquiat then is not so different from the world of Basquiat today. Okay, thank you. I'm new. The world of Basquiat then is not so different from the world of Basquiat today. If the 70s marked the 60s social upheaval and the 80s cultural explosion was part of the manifestation of a timely cultural crossroads, then we are headed towards the new 90s, as fashion has already signaled this. But what of this? Microphone check, 1, 2, what is this? Rest in peace to Malik the 5-footer. Not unlike the 80s had a Western movie star as president, the Republican Party is heralding its own homegrown Hitler reality television star. Sorry, immigrant kid, so we get to invert. Not unlike the Declasamiento of Michael Stewart, we must continue to mourn the black, brown, trans, stolen lives lost at the hands of Lahara, with no irony of the policeman, despite it being only a water gun in Cleveland, a vigilante gunman in Florida, or Billy Club on 14th and 1st, or chokehold in Staten Island. Basquiat's art still breathes life because we still can breathe. Relook at those paintings with the black figures, hands up, don't shoot. The camera in the direction of Oakland Police, Oscar Grant, Sandra Bland. Perhaps the question is not why the resurgence of Basquiat's art, but why has the world remained in a loop of what Amiri Baraka called the changing same? And what in Basquiat's art can continue to embolden us and inspire us to continue to fight for a better world, a more just and safer world, a planet worthy of a new next generation? As we listen and engage the multiple perspectives today, the charge to myself, and I welcome you to join me, how can our conversation around Basquiat be of service to the greater good? How might the urgent social concerns embedded in his artwork help ground us as thinking creative people in strategizing towards a better tomorrow? And instead of contemplating his celebrity allure of Hollywood Africans or ongoing commodification of decolonized minds, we could return to the artwork to re-up for a deeper sense of political commitment to one another. Rather than a celebration of his life alone, let us celebrate each other in the face of structural violence, systemic dehumanization, and the cultural bombs that go boom for real. There is no better moment to repel ghosts of white capitalist supremacy and to review his artwork and hence ourselves in it, as Malcolm would say, with new eyes. Not yesterday or tomorrow, but today. Now's the time to activate Basquiat's art, to see our humanity as possible, as worthy, as crowned with a hoodie, a hijab, a halo of history, always already and yet to be written, if we make it so. Let the continuum of Basquiat's artistic and intellectual contribution be that in 2016, on the corner of J Street and Myrtle, that we responded to the clarion call in his artwork to really pay attention to the way history repeats itself, and that ultimately the actors of history are the everyday people, the non-celebrity, the undiscovered genius, the eyes and eggs workers of the world. Unite. The same-o, the Jimmy Bests on their backs because public schools don't know what to do with the genius children that everyone loves. Basquiat's place in pop culture is with we, the unnoticed, the invisible, the forgotten, populous, wretched of the earth, the dreamers from Dream 9 to the Dream Defenders, because we, the people, united, will never be defeated. Ashe. Let's take this let's do that one more time. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. El pueblo unido. Almost. Okay. Let's take this conversation from the ivory tower, the white cube, the great white way, and the runway, back to the streets from whence it came, back to indigenous Indio land, the Black Atlantic Avenue diaspora, to las islas of the Brown Pacific, Oceania, Latinidad Caribeño, LES, Port-au-Prince, Puerto Rico, Hanamaui, Cote d'Ivoire. Let's bring those who are not into the room wherever we go and allow Basquiat's freedom dreams to be central to this contemporary moment, still so much in need of liberation. And with that, it is an absolute pleasure and honor to introduce my esteemed panelists who each live Basquiat's legacy of art and social justice by serving their multiple communities in unique and awesome ways. Yasmin Ramirez holds, JMB in the building.
Wake up. Come on, wake up. Wake up.
on loop. Okay, that's good. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. What's that? Okay. Okay, that sounds good. So Yasmin Ramirez holds a PhD in art history from the Graduate Center of the City of New York. Born in Brooklyn, New York on April 22nd, 1960, Yasmin Ramirez was active in the downtown art scene of the early 1980s as a club kid, gallery assistant, independent curator, and art critic for the East Village Eye. She became acquainted with many emerging artists and writers that are now held as icons of the 80s, including Basquiat. Currently adjunct curator at the Bronx Museum of Fine Arts, Yasmin Ramirez has also collaborated on curatorial projects with El Museo del Barrio, the Loisaida Center, the Caribbean Cultural Center, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Franklin Furnace, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, NYU, Department of Social and Cultural Analysis, and Taller Boricua. What an honor.
Buenos dias, everyone. Can you hear me? Am I clear?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Let's see. What do I point to for the slides? Do you know? There?
Imagine this way.
Okay. Maybe? Ah, great. All right. So, we're going back to like late 70s, say 1979. Jean-Michel and I were both 19 at the time. Say, how old were you?
I was a little bit younger.
A little bit younger. Okay. So, the city is teeming with images and tags, big, bold bubble letters competing with wild style scripts that you couldn't make out, but you liked the way they looked anyway. And then you came across something else, a tag that trips you out, SAMO. And this is what New York looked like then. I really liked it. Sometimes people say, oh, those were the bad days, but the subways, the streets, everything was art and poetry and music and, you know, some other bad stuff too, but we won't get into that. So a tag that trips you out, SAMO. Now, ostensibly, SAMO was a homophonic spelling of same old shit, the black vernacular phrase that summed up the nation's apathy in post-movement 70s. But it struck me at the time that whoever was writing SAMO was doing different shit every day. Writing poetry and mocking political sloganeering and being an agent provocateur. Almost daring you to put a B between the M and the O to identify the tagger as someone who is frustrated by the same old racist ideologies that typecast black boys as sambos, because that's what I would read when I would see it. I immediately, because SAMO didn't make sense to me, and in Jean-Michel's work, a lot of times if you look at it, he will omit letters intentionally to trip you up and to make you kind of check your mind and see what comes up, what letters are gonna come up, what words are gonna come up for you if it's crossed out. It's very psychologically impactful, his work, when you see it in real life. So in terms of SAMO, early on I got the idea that this guy, SAMO, was a black writer, because no girls wrote graph except Lady Pink. But only after it was revealed that SAMO was two guys, Al Diaz, Puerto Rican, and Jean-Michel Basquiat, a black guy with a French name, because I'm gonna tell you the truth, Haitian, like the idea of meeting a Haitian person was kind of rare. It was a very, very small group of Haitians that were born. So I'm thinking, who's this black guy with a French name? And then I find out later on that he's half Puerto Rican, like me. It was only after that that I began to consider that SAMO could also be a homophone for zambo, the Spanish term that I grew up with that referred to mixed race people of indigenous and African descent that populate most of the Caribbean and Latin America. And I'm just gonna I have time, I think, a little bit. I just want to show you how old that term is. That is a painting from the 16th century of Zambos from Ecuador. And they were called Zambo caciques. In other words, these were Africans that intermarried with the native elite. And here it is, the caste system that I grew up with, which is de negro y mulato sale un sambo. That's about circa 1770. And in the Caribbean, you had all different kinds of names for different racial castes, but Zambo pretty much sums up what most of us are who come from the Caribbean. But for generations, for our generation of creators of color, who were born, say, between 1958 and 1965 in New York City, myself included, I can tell you that terms like Afro-diaspora and Afro-Taino and Afro-Latino was practically non-existent. The one-drop rule was firmly entrenched in this nation and in our neighborhoods. You were either black or white, or in that nameless category, even more stigmatized, called other. And if you and your parents spoke something other than English, i.e. French or Spanish, you were further ostracized as needing remediation by the school system and silenced by our English-only peer group that didn't care to hear you speak your mother's tongue unless you were teaching them curse words. But while the mainstream held that our totality was profane, we knew our day-to-day experience was profound. Our homeschooling tutored us in the art of living between multiple languages and cultures, traveling between the islands on summer vacations, and passing through the largely segregated neighborhoods in the city, being straight up black in Harlem and Bed-Stuy, and breaking into Spanglish in El Barrio, the South Bronx and the Lower East Side. We learned to be expert code switchers and created novel words through homonyms and transliterations. Moreover, we grew up in the shadow of the Young Lords and the Black Panthers and the Five Percenters and Nation of Islam and the bilingual Nuyorican art and poetry movement. And we received their messages of Black and Puerto Rican power via the media, alternate presses, posters on our streets, speeches and songs of revolution on the radio, and even comic books. So one of the things I want to just say is that the cartoon imagery that pervades Basquiat's early work, and those of many other artists from the time, derives from the fact that Mad Magazine, R. Crumb, Marvel, and DC Comics exposed us to more art, history, and socio-political satire than we ever got going to school. So is it any wonder then why Basquiat, and many of us, myself included, dropped out of demoralizing the public school system, and we hit the streets to compose images, signs, raps, dances with like-minded peers. I would say in our generation, there was a split. I mean, a lot of us dropped out because we couldn't take it. It was horrible. An ironic story, ironically, I wanted to go to City of School. If I had gone to City of School, if they had let me go to City of School or Dewey, another school I wanted to go to, I probably would have met Jean. I would have met Jean at City of School, but because I'm Puerto Rican, they don't let you. They told my mother I couldn't go to Dewey. You can't go to that school. That school's not for you. And they would tell us en masse that you have to stay in these zone schools and get a vocational diploma and that kind of thing. And that's why many of us were demoralized. Now, there's a whole other group that we would meet up later in the 90s of my peers, like, for example, Kelly Jones, who grew up in very, middle class, upper middle class intellectual families, but by that time, they were going to school. So we don't meet up with the Black intelligentsia that would begin to truly praise Jean-Michel until the 90s, when they're coming out of graduate school and taking jobs. So I just want you to understand that there was a disconnect. I think that we were all part of this very creative, talented 10th or whatever, but some of us went to like the universities in like campuses, and other of us went to the universities of the streets and the clubs. And within this image-saturated, English-dominated street subculture, SAMO, and Al Diaz's conceptual street art project, interjected an Afro-Latino inflected grito of rebellion. Samo was our generation's corrective to the dominant paradigms of blackness in general and radical black art specifically as being African American, i.e. English-speaking and somewhat uncomfortable or outright intolerant of acknowledging the complex racial mixing that has occurred in the Americas. And when I say the Americas, I'm also talking about the United States, from the time of the conquest to the present. Now, after Samo was declared dead, sometime around 1981, Jean resurrected himself. And I really like this painting right here because, you know, it's like a spear or an arrow, which is kind of like the indigenous, you know, sign for like self-defense, right? Because we didn't have rifles. After Samo was declared dead, sometime around 1981, Jean resurrected himself as an artist. And he made hundreds of conjurings of his African, Puerto Rican, Haitian, European, Native American, and US ancestors. He left us with a depiction of what I like to think of as a vast Zombo cosmology and genealogy. And here, I mean, you can just see all the Spanish words. Like, actually, I'm ashamed to say, you see sangre, and then it has a question mark, sangre, sangre meaning blood. It wasn't until this year that I even knew that in order to put a question mark, I had to put like an upside down question mark around, you know, back and forwards in Spanish when I was doing this show, Presente, because I didn't even really understand proper grammatical Spanish, even though I can write it. So, you know, Jean's work is very deep. He would pick up stuff that you don't ordinarily notice and make you think about, how come they have two question marks? Because that's the proper way of writing Spanish. So, my last paragraph is, Basquiat's perspective was Afro-diasporic, Afro-Indio, Afro-Latino. His work is global, yet also very personal. Because in the end, it is his touch, the colors, the lettering, the multilingual wordplay, the cross-outs and collaging techniques that resonate with new generation of art lovers, especially in the Caribbean, who are just beginning to discover Basquiat's work in situ. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cey Adams is a living, breathing, beautiful artist. Appeared in the 1982 PBS documentary Style Wars. He's been the creative director of Russell Simmons' Def Jam recording and co-founded the Drawing Board, the label's in-house visual design firm where he created visual identities, album covers, logos, and advertising for Run It DMC, BC Boys, LL Cool J, and a host of other amazing folks.
Hello. Can you put the first slide up, or do I have to click it? Okay, I think it's, yeah, that one. You know, rather than talk about the work of Jean-Michel, I thought it was important to focus on some of the artists that came up alongside him that happened to be artists of color. Because contrary to popular belief, when you look at the films and everything else that portrays the life of Jean-Michel, rarely do they mention any of the Black and Latino friends that he had that were also painters at the time. And so I thought I would take this moment to shine a light on some of those folks very briefly, because like Jean-Michel, there were so many amazing, talented artists that hung out downtown, and Yasmin just touched on it just briefly. I think that it's important for people to start to recognize that while myself included, I love his work, but it's time to start looking at some of these other people as well, because we've all collectively paved the way for this movement that we know and love and call hip hop. And I think that Jean-Michel was just one aspect of that. And I hope that a lot of the major institutions will start to finally recognize some of these other amazing painters. And Ramel Z happens to be one of those. And you know, he's somebody who passed away recently, and I honestly don't think that he really ever got his due. He was not only an amazing painter and, like Jean-Michel, a very deep thinker when it came to the way he conveyed his message on canvas and in other materials. But he was also an amazing musician and rapper and MC. And, that's why I use the term hip hop, because, Jean-Michel was also, a producer and a musician. And I think that all of those things fall under the umbrella of hip hop just based on the time that we came up. And so I wanted to just talk about a couple of those artists. I'm embarrassed to say that because I'm standing here, I didn't think to include myself visually into this presentation, but I like to put myself in that group as well. And while I'm not an authority on Rammellzhi's work, I can certainly tell you that he was such a brilliant mind. And like Jean, you couldn't look at one of his paintings in a minute and sum it up. He used a lot of arrows and a lot of mixed messages, and his use of color was just so powerful. And I wanted to just kind of highlight him for a second because he's somebody that, was one of my good friends as well. And I just love his work so much. This is a piece called The Tower. And Rammellzhi, in addition to being an amazing painter, was also somewhat of a leader downtown because he developed this style called iconoclast panzerism. And he had a whole movement of young artists that were in his stable. And, folks like A1 and Toxic and Cool Core and a bunch of others as well. And, some of them were graffiti artists in the beginning, and then they evolved into becoming painters once the movement started to shift and we all realized that we had to find our voice in order to find a way to connect with the galleries. And, while I'm on Rammellzhi, I'll just, talk about that for a brief second. In the mid-'80s, when the galleries started to finally pay attention to what we were doing, and I'm not talking about Fun Gallery or Graffiti Above Ground or any of those galleries. I'm talking about the Tony Shafrazis and the Nina Nosais and all of those folks. They handpicked people out of the movement that they thought were palatable. Maybe they thought that they were a little bit easier on the eye. They could bring them into a room full of collectors. And so a lot of these graffiti artists got pushed to the side because, we were young. We acted like we were young, but it didn't mean that what we were doing was not from the heart. And that was a little difficult for some of these people to stomach. So a lot of people's work got cast to the side. And as time went on, people got discouraged and stopped making work and went off and did other things and got on with real life. But the true painters continued to paint. And I'm going to show you some of the work of a couple of those folks now. This is Toxic, and his real name is Torek A. Black. And he was somebody that came up with Jean-Michel. And one of the things that we realized very early on was that we were not going to get the kind of love that we deserved here in America. And so what a lot of artists like Toxic did was they went to Europe. And when they went to Europe, we were treated with the love and respect that we deserved, very similar to the jazz musicians. It's not, like it doesn't go unnoticed that we always have to leave the country to get acknowledgement for the work that we do. And it really is a shame. It really is. This is one of Toxic's paintings as well. And, again, you can look at this and you can see a lot of the things that I talked about in Rammellzhi's work as well. It's the bold use of color, the shape, form, and, again, he's somebody who conveys a lot of interesting messages in his paintings. And Toxic is somebody that is a career artist as well. You can Google his name. He's got a full website, the same way Core does, and the same way Rammellzhi did. And I just want to, again, reiterate that these people were professional artists. Our only crime was that we started when we were very young. And so a lot of the major institutions did not take notice. And like Yasmin said, it wasn't until the 90s when even people like Jean-Michel and Keith Haring finally started to get their due as it relates to museum exhibitions. And so here we are 40 years later, and all I'm wondering is, why is it taking the major institutions so long to do a full retrospective of this movement? Because the work is beautiful, and you can tell that it's spanned the globe. And if you go to Europe, the major museums have been doing this for over 20 years, and we have yet to have a really comprehensive museum exhibition about this work, other than what they did at the Brooklyn Museum. This is Chuck Hardgrove, and his graffiti name was Cool Core. And he, again, is somebody that came up with Jean-Michel. And as you can see, he's still painting and he's still making work. This is actually one of Toxic's paintings. This is out of order, but I'll just leave it up for a second just so you can see it. And again, like I said, you can just look at the attention to detail, and you can recognize that these are people that are very serious about their craft. And ideally, I think that that is something that is lost on a lot of folks. This is Core's painting. And again, I don't know if it's easy enough to see this here, if it's a little hard with the light, but this is a really beautiful painting. I spent a lot of time looking at this last night. And again, there's a lot of Rammellzee influence in this if you look carefully. And again, a lot of this is derivative of the stuff that Jean-Michel did. He was somebody that, because he had success a little earlier than everybody else, he found a way to bring people along. And so what happened is he would do a show and he would make sure that his friends were included as well, because like a lot of us, he wanted to share everything that he had. And I think that that's something that I'll always remember him for, is being very generous when it came to his space. He would let artists come and work in his space. He would spend time with people. And when you think about the way he's portrayed in the film, all you see are these white artists that basically, suck the energy out of him. And, and I'm saying, Andy included, he was somebody that was already a superstar. When he saw Jean-Michel, that was a new bolt of electricity. And I'm not saying that it didn't benefit, Jean as well, but ideally, it was entertainment for him. Whereas with us, this was life. When I got an opportunity to meet Andy Warhol, it was an amazing thing, but I did recognize that, I was a teenager and he was a grown-ass man. And as you know, today, that sort of thing could not be possible. And I just mention that because we were talented, but we were also very hungry. And we came from humble beginnings, and we wanted to make our mark. And so when we met some of our pop icons, you're looking at them for some sort of guidance, and that's not what they were necessarily in it for. And, I don't want to go off on too much of a negative tangent. I really wanted to keep the spirit up, because ideally this is about celebrating the life of Jean-Michel and his peers. And so at that, I'm going to say thank you for listening.
Hey everybody, can you hear me? All right, so you guys are the Brave Troopers. Saturday morning, first thing. I'm gonna just shut this off if I can. I don't know where to do it, but okay. Okay, so let's click here and let's just see if this works. Cool. All right. I'm just going to start with this image that I saw when I was in Venice this summer in June at the Biennale. I was just walking through the streets, got to a side street that was very deserted, and there on a wall, deeply in the corner, and there was nobody on the street, it was completely deserted, I just saw this image. And I just took a snapshot of it, so it's very small. It's like this big, actually. I don't know who painted it, or who spray painted it. I don't know why. I don't even know if it's Basquiat, but online there's this whole raging debate about this image and why that's there and who would have put it there and so on. But it was arresting to me just to see this in Italy in a small corner of a deserted street on a wall. And then just this week, I just came back last night from Italy. Here I was in London earlier on Monday. And I was thinking about what I wanted to prepare for this conversation. And I'm walking down Brick Lane. Some of you know London. This is the old Truman Brewery in Shoreditch. And there's this it's a kind of charming walkway, the rough trade stores there and so on, outlet stores and all of that. And just walking by, you see, first of all, this, which somebody painted, which is a homage to Frankie Knuckles, the house DJ producer remixer who passed away a little while ago. If you just walk right past it, this just struck me, right? As I'm thinking in my head, what should I talk about? I was like, whoa, Jean-Michel Basquiat in London. So of course there's so many art references all over the world to Basquiat, street art references and so on. My only point is how vast and how far and how global Jean-Michel Basquiat's iconography and imagery has stretched and penetrated seemingly every aspect of the planet, and the way he greets us in places we might least expect. So it all reminded me, I'm going to go a little academic here, I know it's Saturday morning, don't worry, of post-structuralist philosopher Derrida's conception of hauntology. So this is the idea of hauntology, it's basically a portmanteau of two terms, ontology, the study of essence, and haunting. And Derrida would argue that Marxism haunted Western society from beyond the grave. But hauntology is also about the specter or the figure of the ghost as that which is, and I quote, neither present nor absent, neither dead nor alive. So hauntology is all about how a present thing is haunted by specters of the past, and how the past in turn becomes haunted by the present. Hauntology also refers to the way that time is continually out of joint, right? The memory of the past continually haunts the future, how we live in an age of recycling and pastiche and nostalgia where, as writer Mark Fisher describes, nothing dies anymore. Everything comes back on YouTube or as a box set retrospective, the looping repetitive time of trauma. So we live in an age of hauntology. So in some ways, the Jean-Michel Basquiat story is a ghost story, right? In the way that he's a kind of spectral presence who haunts us. He rises to meet us in Venice or on a stroll through East London. He meets us here on Easter weekend, a weekend of resurrection for some. And the way that he retains a kind of presence as a fixture in contemporary popular culture, which is what I want to get to at the end. Okay, so in terms of why I think Jean-Michel Basquiat matters so much to so many people so many years later, here's a closer image, by the way. Clearly, he's the most famous visual artist, I think, to sustain commercial and art world success to come out of the graffiti explosion of the late 1970s, as Yasmin has described. He was a profoundly disruptive force, right? First of all, in the way that he dismantled the high art, low art divide, which defined so much of the 20th century. Not even just the 20th century, but particularly the 20th century, and especially as it related to black visual art. He expanded the racialized definition of what actually constitutes art, right? So it's, for some of us who are younger, it's hard to think of it now, but the idea that graffiti could actually be in a museum, right? That's shocking, right? It was shocking, certainly at the time. He did this partly through his skill, right? I think in some ways he was better than most of his peers, although that's debatable, some would say, but I think the work stands for itself. So the thing I want to stress right now is just that if Jean-Michel Basquiat was not a great artist, we wouldn't even be talking about him, right? If the art wasn't skillfully and brilliantly and impeccably rendered. And I think we have to claim his artistry. We have to remember him as a thoughtful, intellectual, consequential, brilliant artist. And that's partly because all of these kinds of forces of racism, exoticism, Orientalism, and celebrity made it really hard to do that in his lifetime. So if you look at the kind of critical disdain for his work that was sometimes there. These forces were kind of like a fog, sometimes covering the talent. The work was considered by some critics primitive or instinctual or facile or childish, the result of just taking drugs. I guarantee you, if me, Jason King, if I take drugs, I'm not going to be able to paint dust heads, all right? Okay? So other kinds of insidious critiques, like his assistants did all the work, or that he was just chasing Warhol, all a way to deny him his brilliance. Even Julian Schnabel's film, I would argue, does him an injustice by trivializing him, making him seem like a bystander in his own art, sort of denying his own agency. He seems like this sort of hapless sprite who's just wandering around making art. And if it's any consolation, this is a bigger problem than just Jean-Michel Basquiat. This is a problem of black art makers in general in the way that they're perceived. Even somebody like a Michael Jackson, one of our most mainstream figures, right, is not widely understood the nature of his artistry or the complexity or the sophistication of his artistry. Where's the books on Diana Ross, for instance, right? How come we don't do conferences on some of our most beloved figures? So it's no surprise that somebody like Jean-Michel would get lost in the cracks as far as that's concerned. So we need to talk more about his profound skill. Here's Dust Heads 82, which sold for what, 48 million recently in 2013. Fishing 1981. I'm just gonna, this isn't like a presentation that I have. I'm just riffing on some ideas. What still astonishes me about the work, I think in his golden period in particular, like up to 84, 85, the provocativeness of the images, the intensity, the boldness, the use of tools like juxtaposition, quotation, cultural reference, the irresolution of opposites in his work, the sloppiness but the masterfulness, the trivialness but the seriousness, this ineffable cool that still stands the test of time. At its best, Jean-Michel Basquiat's work had this kind of flow, this swing, this rhythmic, expressive energy, this gestural spontaneity that we associate with the best of jazz or black music. This mixture of shamanic violence, spirituality, existential consideration. When you look at his work, it tells you something about the nature of life on this planet. You do not look at Jean-Michel Basquiat's art and feel comfort, right? Or you shouldn't, I think. There's a kind of discomfort at the core, an unease, a trouble, right? Even a kind of bluesiness. There's also this sort of childlikeness, which is very different than childishness, which I think critics got, attacked him for. But the sense of whimsy and wonder mixed with darkness throughout his work, right? That's a very hard balance to strike. We knew that he was a huge fan of bebop, expressed himself as a musician, obviously through Grey, his first band, and continuously the work he did with Rammellzee and so on, carrying his red Walkman around with his cassette tapes everywhere, but music flows throughout his work, right, in the most fascinating of ways. So he became like this bohemian visual art rock star. The work is so wholly original, it's instantly recognizable, right? As recognizable as Charlie Parker's Horn, for instance. But there's all these clear influences there, Twombly and Warhol, but also literary influences, Burroughs and Kerouac. It's so rich and complicated, right, that even 35 years later, we're still unpacking it, right? We're unpacking the images. Sampling in his work, the way that his visual work was an analog to innovations in sampling at the time. My time's up already? That's really fast. Okay, I'm just gonna skip a little bit then. Can you give me like 3 more minutes? Is that all right? All right. So, speaking of time out of joint, clearly, I don't know what time it is. Looking at the ways in which he kind of inhaled the pop culture detritus, right? Sort of like, what's that movie with Jim Carrey, where the cable guy, right? Where he's just like watching television and inhaling everything that's coming through, but recombinating it and resynthesizing it and spitting it back out to us in this complex way. So I think it's important to think of him as an omnivorous recorder, a voracious listener, right? Of music and art and all kinds of cultural ideas. And the way that he resynthesized these things is really, really fascinating. So he prefigured sampling. He prefigured mashups in his work, right? And then the use of language, of course. So Yasmin talked about Samo, but just thinking of the way in which Jean-Michel Basquiat uses language in the way that Sly, from Sly and the Family Stone would too, right? Where Sly would say, there's a permanent crease in your right and wrong. Thank you for letting me be myself again. There's a Mickey in the tasting of disaster. This kind of foreboding, ominous, densely cerebral use of text that punches you in the gut and forces you to unpack it. And so thinking about the ways in which Jean-Michel Basquiat's work foreshadowed and prefigured social media and Twitter, right? These short, packed, pithy pronouncements, like origin of cotton. That's it. So his brain was like this constant scrawl, right, that is processing all this information. So he prefigured art making in the age of instantly consumable and ephemeral Snapchats. Okay, so let me just, since I have no time, I'm just gonna jump really quickly to the end part of what I wanted to get to here, which has to do with contemporary references to Jean-Michel Basquiat in work. Let me just skip past all these great images that we don't have time to talk about. Riding with Death, 1988. I think stunning, fascinating, shocking, so powerful even in this contemporary moment where we're thinking about the ways in which Black Lives Matter, or we should be thinking about those things. I have no idea what this is. Let me click on it. How do I do this? Don't know. How does one do that? Play, maybe? Nope.
Whoever's doing the computer.
Skip past it again. Okay, well, one, I'll just talk about it. One is the MP3, it's an MP3, I think, of Jay-Z, Picasso Baby, right, where he references Jean-Michel Basquiat. There's over 200 references in hip-hop music and lyrics to Jean-Michel Basquiat, whether it's A$AP Rocky, et cetera. Are any of these gonna work? I don't know. Let's see. Play. Nope. Can you guys do it, maybe? Yeah. Don't know. So anyways, a lot of the contemporary references are really fascinating, but of course Kanye, right, is the figure that a lot of people try to reference alongside Jean-Michel Basquiat, and there's a number of reasons for that, many of which we don't have time to get into now, but the way in which Kanye is sort of courting celebrities, the way he's surrounded himself with, sort of right now, right, in this kind of world that may not be doing him certain kinds of good, at least people would argue in terms of the messiness of the work that we're seeing with Life of Pablo. Kanye's reference of I am a God sort of being similar in some ways to, as a compensatory gesture to Jean-Michel Basquiat's use of crowns and kings, the idea of the will to proceed in the face of noise about your art and just keep making art, but also both of their sort of hyper self-awareness about celebrity, the deployment and manipulation of it, and maybe celebrities manipulating them, manipulated Jean-Michel Basquiat ultimately at the end of the day in the way that it might be manipulating Kanye right now. Wow, totally out of joint. We can just stop that right now. There's no need for that. Okay, thanks. So the use of narcissism and so on with Kanye. But I think one of the major differences I just want to bring up, and this will just be the close of it, is today, especially with musicians, when we're thinking about how they might relate to somebody like Jean-Michel Basquiat, given the number of references that they're making. And I have a video of Macklemore saying how Jean-Michel Basquiat is his #1 icon, which is very strange. I don't see it in his work. It's a little odd. So one of the things I think is different is that musicians today in 2016, a lot of them are mainstream musicians are making music in an age of branding, right? And an age of commerce where in order to sustain yourself when there are very few opportunities to make money from selling your records, you have to sort of connect with a corporation if you can, that can pay for you, that can patronize you, sponsor you, and so on. So we're seeing this sort of complicitness with corporations, so that even when Beyonce with Formation does a piece that is, you could argue, a kind of protest piece that is critiquing racism or just acknowledging her relationship to race in a way that challenges the history of how black pop musicians have had to go crossover and have to sort of had to deny race. I think we're seeing too much of a complicity, right, with corporations, with corporate culture, with celebrity, with hyper-commercialism, with branding, in a way that you can't imagine a Curtis Mayfield or a Gil Scott-Heron back in the day sort of being buddied up with like Adidas, right? And so what you end up with is Kanye West at Madison Square Garden, working with Vanessa Beecroft, but taking an image from Rwandan genocide and like aestheticizing black suffering, right? And this is one of the things I don't see in Jean-Michel Basquiat's work, right? What I see is an intertextuality that makes you do the work, right? Mm-hmm. And in which, even as he's sort of chasing after, art world success and money and so on, there is this kind of distance, right? And there's sort of understanding of the way in which commercialism can also be, contribute to racism itself, right? And so I think what we have to do is maybe find a space in this culture, or at least an alternative, right, to some of these kinds of narratives around branding and so on, some of which Jean-Michel Basquiat himself initiated, I think, in the 1980s, but to find a space outside of it to be able to make art in a way that is going to be as profound as some of the stuff that he produced 35 years ago. Thank you.
So I know that we're also running out of time. Our final panelist is Michaela Angela Davis, an image activist, writer, cultural critic, fashion, beauty, culture editor, editorial board director, and creator of Mad Free, an exclusive content creating, cultural curating service premiere project, and is liberating conversations about image, beauty, and power. Thank you.
Jason, thank you for saving us a Macklemore on Saturday morning. Hi, y'all. So I'm going to read from this essay that I wrote when I didn't need readers, and it's part of Black Cool 1000 Streams of Blackness by Rebecca Walker. Put some of us together and really talking about the power of style. And what was interesting, or I was obsessed not only with the work of Basquiat, but how his style was work, and how it too was genius, and how it too was disruptive, and how he understood how the Black body could present and break and disrupt. So I was cranky when I wrote this essay. I am not cranky now. I am actually optimistic in the middle of a revolution. And I spent most of this essay, Rebecca asked me to write about Black cool and Black style, and I was mad at the time. And so most of this essay was talking about what I wasn't going to write about. So, but it also, I talked about magic, and that's part of the name of this panel, so I'm going to read parts that will speak to that. And are we going to have time for Q&A? I'm not sure. That's the best part. Okay, so I'm going to read fast. Yes. We will? Great. Oh, and also thank you to all the sisters that helped put this together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Telling you, sisters make movements move. Okay, I will not write, at least for now, another celebration song of our swag, our genius, way of taking something from nothing and changing whole industries. I'm not going to proclaim how Black folks activate clothes or something like Black people don't wear fashion, they perform it. I'm not going to praise how B-girls and round-the-way boys are the beginning and never-ending superheroes of fashion and youth style culture. I'm not even going to get down with the optimism, energy, and cool commerce the hip-hop generation brought to the entire fashion universe. How hip-hop style is something like a phenomenon, and how poor Black and Latino kids created a fashion revolution that rocked around the world. I'm not going to write about how door knocker earrings knocked the cameo out of the great American jewelry box, or how hip-hop style is like Michael Jackson, spanning generations because its innovation was fresh enough to outlive its originators. I won't tell the famous tale about how former hustlers made diamonds okay for day and denim fine for night, enough to make Jackie O clutch the pearls that everyone placed "this is high American fashion style" money on, and blew it because jeans and sneakers last longer and penetrate real people deeper than any pillbox hat and white gloves ever could. Black style is not elitist, it is genius. Shit, I'm not even gonna talk about how only we organically and regularly weave fashion and style into our music, how Black people rap the best dressed list. Jack, no, not even hip hop is enough right now. And I believe hip hop has the power to hurt and heal just about anything. Sorry kids, this isn't gonna be that kind of party. As a matter of fact, it ain't a party at all. This is a fight. A struggle of style to protect and secure our survival and legacy. Black style is ours. It belongs to us. We didn't throw it overboard with the diseases and demons. We didn't get it kicked, choked, or raped out of us. It couldn't be burned up or shot up or locked up. You can't fuck it up. Black style is indestructible, baby, and abuse and oppression only makes it fresher. And let's see, I'm gonna skip. So we cannot forget the fearlessness of the black style